Imagine, if you will, a scenario. It feels ripped from an ancient epic, but somehow it still echoes today.
An entire nation, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions, living as slaves.
And then suddenly, almost impossibly, they just walk out, right out from under the heel of maybe the most powerful empire of their time.
It's an incredible image.
Yeah.
And the stories that go with it, seas splitting in two.
Yeah, plagues sweeping across a kingdom. A
What?
single leader armed with, what, faith and a staff?
Standing defiant against a god king, Pharaoh himself.
It's so powerful, so cinematic, it almost feels, well, too grand to be strictly historical, doesn't it? But here's the twist, the sort of unsettling whisper that's echoed for millennia. What if the actual historical records from that time, from Egypt especially, are just silent?
Profoundly silent.
And what if the truth, the real story, is far more complex, maybe more mysterious than we even dare to imagine?
That's the core of the enigma.
Today on The Deep Dive, we're going deep into one of humanity's most compelling and, let's be honest, most fiercely debated narratives. The Exodus.
And it's so much more than just an ancient biblical tale. This story has shaped the very foundations of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Absolutely. It became a kind of blueprint for freedom movements, didn't it? Across centuries, continents.
From the American Revolution, you could argue, to the Civil Rights era, definitely, its influence is monumental.
Yet, for all that impact, it remains this historical and theological puzzle. The pieces are scattered everywhere. Ancient texts, archaeological digs.
And, of course, the often conflicting ideas from scholars debating it all.
What's so captivating, I think, isn't just its religious weight, but how multifaceted it is.
Exactly. It functions as this profound national origin story, right? But also a testament to divine intervention and a universal symbol for the human quest for liberation itself.
So, as your guides today, we're approaching this not as, say, preachers giving a sermon, or even just historians laying out facts.
More like detectives of antiquity. That's the feel we're going for.
Yeah, sifting through the fragments, looking at the evidence, and, crucially, the lack of evidence in some areas.
Exploring all the different hypotheses, the theories that try to explain this enduring mystery.
Our mission isn't to give you definitive answers. Frankly, we probably couldn't, even if we wanted to.
No, the goal is to illuminate the questions, the really sharp ones, to lay out the competing ideas.
And really, to invite you, our listener, to join us in this millennia-old investigation. As we peel back these layers, ask yourself, what stands out to you? What's the most profound mystery here? Okay, so our journey into the Exodus has to begin, really, where all great stories do, with the foundational texts.
Right. It's an incredible narrative. And honestly, much of the Judeo-Christian tradition, it's rooted in what we call the Pentateuch.
The Pentateuch.
Which is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. In Jewish tradition, it's revered as the Torah. And these books, they really establish the entire framework for understanding the Exodus story.
So walk us through them briefly.
Sure. You start with Genesis, or Bereshit, in the beginning.
Yeah.
It sets the whole cosmic stage. Creation, Adam and Eve, Noah, the flood, and crucially, the covenant with Abraham. That establishes the lineage of the people who eventually become Israel.
Okay.
Then comes Shemot, meaning names, which we know as Exodus. And this is our main focus today. It details the slavery in Egypt, the miraculous liberation, that pivotal covenant at Mount Sinai.
The core story.
Exactly. And then the following books, Leviticus, Vayikra, and he called Numbers, Bamidbar in the wilderness, and Deuteronomy, Devarim, words. They unfold the intricate laws, the challenges of that long desert journey, Moses' final speeches. They complete that foundational narrative arc.
What strikes me whenever I revisit these texts is that they aren't just straightforward religious documents, are they?
Not at all. They're incredibly rich, complex compilations, almost like a literary mosaic, serving multiple functions simultaneously.
How so?
Well, you can clearly see elements of, say, nation-building propaganda, stories crafted to forge a shared identity, a shared destiny for this emerging people. They also contain ancient myth, epic poetry, recounting events on this grand, almost cosmic scale.
And, of course, the legal codes.
Absolutely. Comprehensive legal codes dictating everything from civil justice to really intricate religious rituals and holiness codes.
So ultimately, they function as this profound spiritual manifesto, too, charting humanity's relationship with the divine, offering a moral compass.
Exactly. And understanding this blend of genres, myth, history, law, theology is crucial for appreciating their enduring power and influence.
Now, traditionally, authorship was attributed solely to Moses, right? Implying this single, direct divine revelation.
That was the long-held tradition, yes. But modern scholarship offers a, shall we say, more nuanced picture, particularly through what's known as the documentary hypothesis.
Right, I've heard of this, the idea of different sources.
Precisely. This theory suggests the Pentateuch wasn't written by one person at one time, but was actually compiled over centuries from at least 4 distinct literary sources. Scholars often label them J, E, P, and D.
J, E, P.
Yeah, each source seems to have its own distinctive style, its own vocabulary, its preferred name for God, even its own theological emphasis. And these were likely woven together by later editors or redactors into the intricate tapestry we read today.
Okay, so if the text is this complex patchwork, this mosaic of voices and traditions from different eras, does that fundamentally change how we should approach its truth?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Are we looking for purely historical fact in the modern sense, or is the truth something different?
For me, I have to say, this idea of multiple authors, layers built up over generations, it doesn't actually diminish the power of the text.
Yeah, so?
Well, instead of a single monolithic decree, it kind of transforms it into this living, evolving narrative, a collective memory almost.
Like finding different eyewitness accounts from different times.
Exactly. Each adding its own color, its own perspective, its own layer of meaning. It makes it richer somehow. I agree. It absolutely invites us to engage with the text on a deeper level as a reflection of a people's spiritual and historical journey, acknowledging that its profound meaning might lie beyond just a simple historical transcription.
Okay, with that foundational understanding of the texts, let's dive into the core story itself, the dramatic Exodus narrative as it unfolds in the Bible. It starts, really, with a pretty dire situation setting the stage.
It does. We know the basic outline. The descendants of Jacob, who came down to Egypt centuries earlier as a relatively small group.
70 people, the text says initially.
Right. But over time, as the book of Exodus puts it, they became exceedingly fruitful and multiplied, eventually filling the land.
This population boom, though, it wasn't seen as a good thing by the Egyptians, was it?
No, it was perceived as a major threat by a new king, a new Pharaoh. And the text significantly notes this Pharaoh knew nothing of Joseph, the ancestor who had once saved Egypt from famine.
So the past goodwill was forgotten.
Completely. Fearing the Israelites' sheer numbers and their potential to ally with Egypt's enemies in wartime, this Pharaoh began to oppress them. Ruthless forced labor.
Building those famous store cities, Pithom and Ramses.
Exactly. Grueling work under harsh conditions.
But the narrative makes a really striking point here. Despite this brutal oppression, the Israelites just kept multiplying.
Which only intensified Pharaoh's fear and paranoia. And that led him to an even more horrific decree.
The order to the midwives.
Yes. He commanded the Hebrew midwives, named Shiphrah and Puah in the text, to kill all newborn Israelite male babies at birth.
An attempted genocide, essentially.
Absolutely. But these women, the text says, they feared God more than Pharaoh, and they defied his order.
They came up with that clever excuse, didn't they? About Hebrew women being vigorous and giving birth too quickly?
They did, a remarkable act of resistance. But Pharaoh, undeterred, escalated his brutality even further. He issued a public decree to all his people. Every Hebrew boy born was to be thrown into the Nile River.
Just imagine the sheer terror. The desperation of an entire people marked for extinction, yet somehow clinging to this fragile, almost impossible hope.
It's within that crucible, that context of state-sanctioned infanticide, that the story of Moses begins. His survival itself is presented as miraculous.
The basket in the reeds.
Exactly. His mother, a Levite woman, hides him for 3 months. Then, unable to hide him any longer, she places him in a papyrus basket, coated with tar and pitch to make it waterproof, and sets it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile, the very river intended to be his grave.
And then, in this incredible twist of fate, who finds him?
Pharaoh's own daughter. She comes down to the Nile to bathe, sees the basket, has her attendants retrieve it, and finds the crying baby.
Takes pity on him.
Yes, recognizing he's one of the Hebrew children. She names him Moses, which the text relates to the Hebrew verb to draw out because she drew him out of the water.
And then the ultimate irony.
His own mother is brought in to nurse him. Moses' sister, Miriam, who had been watching from a distance, cleverly suggests finding a Hebrew woman to nurse the baby and fetches their mother. So Moses is raised, initially at least, by his own mother, right under the nose of the Pharaoh who sought his destruction.
This early life, it really sets up Moses' unique duality, doesn't it? Raised in the privilege and education of the Egyptian palace.
But simultaneously connected through his hidden heritage to his oppressed people, This internal conflict seems core to his character.
And it comes to a head violently, doesn't it, when he's grown?
It does. The text says Moses goes out to see the burdens of his people, and he witnesses an Egyptian overseer brutally beating a Hebrew slave.
And he snaps.
In a fit of passionate rage, maybe righteous indignation, he looks around, sees no one, kills the Egyptian and buries him in the sand. A decisive, violent act.
But his secret doesn't stay secret for long.
No. The very next day, he sees two Hebrews fighting and tries to intervene, but one of them throws it back in his face. "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?"
He realizes he's been found out.
Instantly, he knows his life is in danger. Pharaoh hears of it, seeks to kill him, and Moses is forced to flee Egypt, escaping to the land of Midian.
So this moment of maybe passionate justice leads directly to exile. He becomes a fugitive.
Exactly. It paints him not as some instant perfect hero, but as a deeply human figure grappling with his identity, his loyalty, the harsh realities, and the consequences of his own actions.
It's incredibly relatable, even millennia later. Imagine that conflict is about the Egyptian upbringing versus the Hebrew heritage, that burning injustice, the swift, deadly action, the terror. What would you do in his position?
It grounds the epic story that follows. He spends the next 40 years, the tradition says, in Midian as a shepherd, a period of seeming obscurity.
Until the burning bush.
Precisely. Tending his father-in-law Jethro's flock near Mount Horeb, often identified with Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. He sees this incredible sight, a bush engulfed in flames, but miraculously not burning up.
Naturally, he goes closer to investigate.
And as he approaches, the voice of God calls out directly from the bush, "Moses! Moses!" He's told to remove his sandals, for he's on holy ground. God then reveals himself as the God of his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
And declares his intention.
Yes, God states he has seen the misery of his people in Egypt, heard their cries, and is determined to rescue them and bring them to a land flowing with milk and honey.
And then comes the commission.
So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt.
But Moses doesn't exactly jump at the chance, does he?
Far from it. His response is profoundly human, filled with self-doubt. "Who am I," he asks, "that I should go to Pharaoh?" He questions his ability, his authority.
He asks for God's name.
Yes, leading to the famous revelation. I am WHO, I am Yahweh, a name signifying eternal presence, self-existence. Moses still worries the Israelites won't believe him.
So God gives him signs.
Powerful signs. The staff turning into a snake, his hand becoming leprous, then healed, water from the Nile turning to blood on the ground. These are meant to validate his mission.
But even then,
Moses protests, famously saying he is slow of speech and tongue, essentially claiming he's not eloquent enough for the task.
which leads to Aaron being brought in.
Exactly. God, perhaps in exasperation, appoints Moses' brother, Aaron, who is eloquent, to be his spokesperson, his prophet. It highlights this incredibly human Moses, full of fear, doubt, insecurity, yet chosen for this extraordinary divine task.
Yeah.
It emphasizes God's initiative overcoming human limitations.
Does that hesitation, that very human reluctance, make Moses more relatable to you, the listener, or does it challenge your expectation of a divine leader? It adds layers, certainly.
It really does. And this whole narrative, it's become more than just religious history. It's a foundational cultural archetype of liberation.
Absolutely. You hear echoes of it everywhere. Martin Luther King Jr. constantly invoked Moses and the Exodus.
The American founding fathers saw parallels in their escape from British tyranny.
Even today, you see Exodus imagery used in movements challenging oppression globally. It prompts the question, doesn't it? What contemporary struggles, what modern aspirations for freedom do you see reflected in this ancient, powerful story of escape? So the biblical account paints this incredibly vivid, dramatic picture. Powerful stuff.
Absolutely, a cornerstone narrative.
But, and this is a big but, for every powerful claim within that narrative, there are these persistent whispers of doubt, questions that really challenge its grounding in history as we understand it.
And that's where our deep dive really gets fascinating, I think, as we start unearthing the controversies.
Because despite its undeniable cultural and religious impact, the Exodus, when you look at it from a strictly historical or archaeological viewpoint, faces some pretty significant, even, unsettling challenges. #TagTagTagay, the silence of Egyptian records.
One of the most striking things, especially for historians, is the stark contrast between that epic biblical story and the actual records left behind by ancient Egypt.
And the Egyptians were meticulous record keepers, weren't they?
Obsessed with it. They carved their triumphs into stone monuments, painted royal decrees on tomb walls, kept papyrus records detailing everything from military campaigns and building projects to, grain inventories and legal disputes. Their scribes were incredibly prolific.
So you'd expect something if events of this magnitude happened.
You really would. Yet, amidst this vast, detailed archive, there's just this profound, almost deafening silence about the Exodus story.
No mention of those catastrophic plagues that supposedly crippled their entire nation.
None that we've found. No account of a massive departure of hundreds of thousands or even millions of Hebrew slaves.
And definitely nothing about Pharaoh's elite chariot army being wiped out in the Red Sea.
Not a whisper. It's as if, from the official Egyptian perspective recorded in their monuments and state records, these defining events simply never occurred.
Which forces us into some difficult questions, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. Is it possible, for example, that Egypt, a society that always presented itself as invincible, divinely favored, simply chose to erase such a massive national humiliation from its history? Expunge the record.
Nations do that, right? Control the narrative.
They certainly try. Or could it be that the biblical timeline we often assume is maybe more symbolic than strictly literal? Meaning the events, if they happen, might not align neatly with the specific recorded periods that archaeologists have been able to identify so far.
Or maybe the scale was different.
That's another possibility. Could the biblical account describe an event that, from the Egyptian viewpoint, was perhaps too minor, involved too few people, to warrant mention in their grand histories? Or maybe it was framed differently, described in terms we now misinterpret, looking for a one-to-one correlation that wasn't intended.
It makes you picture those ancient scribes, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Quill in hand, making choices about what victories to immortalize and what defeats, what embarrassments to just omit.
What political agendas, what need to maintain Pharaoh's divine image might have been at play? It's a chilling thought, really. Makes you wonder what other secrets those ancient stones are keeping. #B, the archaeological void in the desert.
Okay, so beyond the silence in Egyptian written records, our investigation takes us out into the field, doesn't it? Into the vast, windswept landscape of the Sinai Peninsula.
Exactly. The very desert where the Bible says millions of Israelites wandered for 40 years. And for decades, archaeologists have conducted extensive, really intensive digs all across this region.
Looking for traces of this massive migration.
That's the goal. But here, the silence continues. It turns into what you might call an archaeological void.
Meaning?
Meaning, despite countless expeditions, numerous surveys, careful excavations, there's virtually no direct physical evidence that corresponds to such a monumental migration as described in Exodus.
So no remains of large encampments.
No large-scale temporary settlements from that period. No distinctive pottery trails you'd expect from a huge group moving through. No mass burial sites. Not even the kind of ancient garbage dumps that would signify the sustained presence of a population numbering, potentially, in the millions, complete with livestock, over 4 decades.
The sheer scale described in the Bible, it seems to leave no discernible footprint in the sand.
Which is, archaeologically speaking, very puzzling if you take the numbers literally. And it leads to several critical hypotheses.
Okay, like what?
Well, one idea was the story, perhaps originally, a much smaller scale event, maybe involving a far more modest group of people, hundreds, maybe thousands, not millions. And was this core event later amplified, embellished over generations of retelling into the grand national epic we read today?
So a historical kernel, maybe, but magnified over time.
That's one possibility. Another line of thought is, could the Exodus be primarily or even purely a spiritual allegory, designed to teach profound theological truths about liberation, covenant, divine guidance, rather than recounting precise historical facts intended to leave a literal physical footprint?
The meaning is the message, not the historical detail.
In that view, yes. And we also have to grapple with the practical reality of the Sinai during the proposed periods for the Exodus, roughly the Late Bronze Age.
It wasn't just empty desert.
Far from it. It was inhabited, crisscrossed by established trade routes, and crucially, it was monitored and guarded by Egyptian forts and patrols, especially along the main ways.
Which raises a very practical, almost logistical question.
Exactly. How could such an enormous group, supposedly numbering in the millions, possibly pass through and survive in a monitored region for 40 years without leaving significant traces and without attracting major attention from the Egyptian authorities stationed there?
The combination of that practical challenge and the profound lack of archaeological evidence, it creates a significant historical puzzle.
It really does. And it leads to that provocative question. If the evidence isn't there, does it definitively mean it didn't happen? Or are we perhaps looking for the wrong kind of evidence? Or maybe even looking in the wrong places, misinterpreting the geography. It keeps the investigation wide open. #Z. Dating dilemmas and conflicting timelines.
All right, another major area of, let's say, scholarly friction revolves around simply when the Exodus might have happened, trying to put a date on it.
Yes, the chronology is a huge point of contention. Scholars have proposed various dates over the years, mainly clustering around two primary periods.
Which are?
Broadly speaking, either somewhere around 1400 BCE, often called the early date, or around 1200 BCE, the late date. These are often based on interpreting certain biblical passages, like the mention of the Israelites building the store cities of Pithom and Ramses, or calculations based on later biblical chronologies.
But here's the rub, right? These proposed timelines consistently seem to clash with what we know from Egyptian history and archaeology.
They often do, quite dramatically. Trying to pinpoint which specific pharaoh was the pharaoh of the Exodus, or matching the biblical events to a specific historical era in Egypt, proves incredibly difficult. There's just no consensus, no clear historical slot where this epic drama seems to fit seamlessly with the established Egyptian king lists, known political events, or archaeological findings for those periods.
It just doesn't line up neatly.
Not easily, no. And this chronological ambiguity, predictably, has fueled a whole range of alternative hypotheses about the story's origins and development.
Such as?
Well, some scholars propose that the Exodus narrative, at least in the detailed form we have it now, might have been composed, or perhaps heavily edited and shaped, centuries after the events it purports to describe.
Maybe during the Babylonian exile.
That's a prominent theory, yes. Around the 6th century BCE. In this view, the story wasn't written as a contemporary historical chronicle right after the events happened. Instead, it emerged later as a powerful, unifying myth for people who were displaced, suffering in exile, needing a foundational story of divine deliverance to forge their identity and give them hope.
A story for their time, drawing on older traditions perhaps, but shaped by current needs.
Exactly. Another intriguing theory, though also debated, suggests the Exodus narrative might contain echoes or perhaps be a kind of theological reframing of a different historical event, the expulsion of the Hyksos from Egypt.
The Hyksos, they were foreign rulers in Egypt for a time, right?
Yes, a group of Asiatic rulers who dominated parts of Egypt from roughly the 17th down to the 16th centuries BCE, before being forcefully expelled by native Egyptian rulers. While it's a distinct historical event with different circumstances, some scholars see potential parallels, a foreign Semitic group being driven out of Egypt that could have influenced the later development of the Exodus story, perhaps blending memories or motifs.
So these theories suggest the biblical account might not be a straightforward historical record in the way we think of history today.
But perhaps more of a narrative shaped and refined over time by later theological priorities, nationalistic aspirations, reflecting how a people came to understand their past and their relationship with God through a specific, often spiritually interpreted lens.
Which brings us back to a key question for you, the listener. How does understanding these dating problems, these chronological ambiguities, and these various theories about the story's origins, how does that affect your perception of its truth, its veracity, its enduring power? Does it make it less real, or maybe real in a different, perhaps more symbolic or theological way?
And this really brings us full circle, back to that idea of the Pentateuch's composition we touched on earlier. It's so central to navigating the complexities of the Exodus narrative.
You mean the documentary hypothesis?
Exactly. Modern biblical scholarship largely embraces this theory or variations of it, and it fundamentally reshapes how we understand these foundational texts.
Remind us of the core idea.
The core idea is that the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, wasn't a single unified text written by one person, Moses or anyone else, at one specific time.
Okay.
Instead, it was likely compiled, edited, woven together over a long period, perhaps many centuries, from at least 4 distinct major literary sources or traditions.
The J, E, P, and D sources.
Correct. The Yahwist, J, the Elohist, E, the priestly writer, P, and the Deuteronomist, D. Scholars identify these based on differences in vocabulary, writing style, theological perspectives, preferred names for God, recurring themes, and even apparent contradictions or duplications within the text itself.
So different voices, different viewpoints, all brought together.
Precisely. These sources likely emerged at different historical periods, reflecting the concerns and beliefs of their time, and were then skillfully combined by later editors or redactors into the more or less unified narrative we have today.
The implication for the Exodus story specifically is pretty profound then.
It really is.
Yeah.
It suggests that the Exodus account, rather than being a single monolithic historical record dictated word for word, is probably more like a patchwork, a rich tapestry woven from various strands. Oral traditions passed down through generations, maybe folk tales, different clan histories, theological reflections, priestly regulations, all contributing to the final story.
It makes you think about the process of how ancient texts came to be, doesn't it? Not just dropped from heaven, but compiled, edited, shaped by human hands and minds over time.
Absolutely. Imagine different communities, perhaps in different parts of ancient Israel or Judah, at different times, each preserving and sharing its version of these pivotal events. And then later scribes or priests meticulously combining these traditions, sometimes preserving different versions side by side, into the coherent narrative we now read.
So from this perspective, the truth of the Exodus, it might not reside in pinning down one single verifiable historical site that matches every detail.
Perhaps not. It might reside more in the layers of collective memory, the evolving beliefs, the spiritual journey of a people, as expressed through these interwoven traditions, their final canonical form. It invites us to understand the profound meaning and purpose embedded within the narrative as it developed, rather than focusing solely on its literal historical accuracy in a modern scientific sense.
So as detectives of antiquity, understanding the Exodus through this lens means we're not just analyzing a single document, we're looking at a complex, layered manuscript.
A literary archaeological site, in a way.
Yeah, exactly. Each layer contributes its own perspective, enriching the overall picture, making it far more intricate than a simple historical chronicle might suggest. It certainly makes the investigation more nuanced, more challenging, but maybe ultimately more rewarding, too.
And of course, you can't talk about the Exodus without talking about its central figure, Moses.
Absolutely. The story is completely inseparable from him. But who was he really, this enigmatic leader?
That's a huge question in itself. Was he a real historical figure, a general, a lawgiver? Was he more of a legendary hero whose story grew over time? Or is he primarily a powerful mythical archetype, embodying a people's aspirations for freedom and divine connection?
Or maybe some combination of all three.
Very possibly. Let's delve deeper into this central figure, starting with those dramatic, almost unbelievable circumstances of his early life. #A early life and the weight of destiny.
We already touched on it, his miraculous survival being found by Pharaoh's daughter. It immediately places him in this unique, almost impossible position, doesn't it?
Completely. Born a Hebrew, marked for death by Pharaoh's decree, yet saved and raised within the very heart of the empire, seeking his people's destruction.
Growing up in the opulence of the Egyptian palace, getting that princely education and privilege.
But crucially, knowing, or perhaps discovering, his true lineage, his connection to his oppressed people. This duality, this internal tension between two worlds, seems absolutely fundamental to his character arc in the narrative.
And this internal conflict, it doesn't just stay internal, it erupts into violence early in his adult life.
Yes, the story in Exodus 2 is pivotal. Moses, now grown and clearly aware of his Hebrew identity, goes out to witness the brutal reality of his people's forced labor.
And he sees something he can't ignore.
He sees an Egyptian overseer savagely beating a Hebrew slave, one of his kinsmen. And in a fit of, well, the text doesn't explicitly state his motive, but perhaps righteous fury or protective instinct.
He acts decisively.
He looks around, sees no witnesses, or so he thinks, kills the Egyptian, and buries the body in the sand. A swift, violent, and secretive act.
But secrets have a way of coming out, especially in stories like this.
Indeed. The very next day, Moses tries to intervene in a fight between two Hebrews. He tries to play the peacemaker, the judge.
And it backfires.
Spectacularly. One of the Hebrews challenges him directly.
Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?
The secret is out. He knows he's exposed.
Instantly. The text says Moses was afraid, realizing his deed was known. And soon enough, Pharaoh hears about it and seeks to execute him. Moses has no choice but to flee Egypt.
He becomes a fugitive, an exile.
Exactly. This early narrative is fascinating because it doesn't present Moses as a flawless, ready-made hero from the start. It shows him grappling with his identity, his loyalties, the harsh realities of power and oppression, and the very real, dangerous consequences of his own impulsive actions. That single act of passionate, perhaps justifiable violence leads directly to 40 years of exile.
It makes him feel more human, doesn't it? Despite the epic scale. Imagine that internal conflict, the privilege versus the heritage, the injustice, the impulsive act, the terror of being hunted by the most powerful man in the world. What would you do in his shoes? Caught between worlds, forced into a desperate choice. It really grounds the larger-than-life story that follows.
#B. The wilderness years and the divine encounter.
So Moses flees Egypt and ends up in the land of Midian. And according to the tradition, he spends the next 4 decades there.
40 years, that's a long time. Doing what?
Living a seemingly quiet, unassuming life as a shepherd. He marries Zipporah, the daughter of a Midianite priest named Jethro, and tends his father-in-law's flocks. It's a period of apparent obscurity, a stark contrast to his upbringing in Pharaoh's palace and the dramatic act that forced him into exile.
And it's during this quiet period out in the wilderness that the defining moment happens.
The transformative, life-altering encounter. The burning bush.
One of the most iconic images in religious history.
Absolutely. He's out tending the flock near Mount Horeb, which the text calls the mountain of God, often identified with Sinai. And he sees this extraordinary sight.
A bush on fire, but not burning up.
Exactly. Engulfed in flames, yet miraculously, utterly unconsumed by them. A supernatural anomaly that naturally catches his attention, draws his curiosity.
He goes closer to investigate this strange sight.
And as he approaches, a voice calls out to him directly from within the burning bush. "Moses, where is it?" Yes. He's immediately commanded, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." God then identifies himself as the God of Moses' ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
And states his awareness of the situation back in Egypt.
Explicitly, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering." God declares his plan to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey.
And then comes the direct, world-changing command.
"So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt."
But Moses, again, isn't exactly eager, is he? Even after this incredible divine encounter.
Not at all. His response is immediate reluctance, rooted in a profound sense of inadequacy. "Who am I," he asks almost pleadingly, "that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He doubts his own capability, his own standing.
He even asks for God's name, right? As if needing credentials.
Yes. Which leads to that incredibly profound and mysterious self-revelation from God. "I am who I am," or perhaps, "I will be who I will be," often transliterated as Yahweh. A name signifying eternal presence, self-existence, maybe even active involvement.
But Moses still has doubts. Will the people believe him?
He voices that exact concern. What if they don't listen to me? What if they say the Lord hasn't appeared to me? This prompts God to grant him those miraculous signs as proof of his commission.
The staff turning into a snake.
His hand becoming leprous like snow when put into his cloak, then restored.
And the ability to turn Nile water into blood on dry ground, signs meant to convince both the Israelites and eventually Pharaoh.
But even with these divine reassurances and miraculous tools, Moses still hesitates.
He brings up his speech impediment.
Famously, yes. "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue." He essentially says, "I'm not the right person for this job. I can't speak well enough."
And this is where Aaron comes into the picture officially.
Exactly. God, maybe showing a bit of divine impatience, but also providing a solution, points out that Moses' brother, Aaron the Levite, is known to be a good speaker. God arranges for Aaron to meet Moses and serve as his mouthpiece, his spokesperson. Aaron will speak to the people, and Moses will be like God to Aaron, telling him what to say.
It's such a detailed account of his reluctance. It really highlights a profoundly human Moses, doesn't it? Full of doubts, fears, insecurities.
Absolutely. Yet despite all that, he is chosen for this extraordinary history-altering task. The narrative strongly emphasizes divine initiative and the power of God working through and ultimately overcoming human limitations and perceived weaknesses.
So let me ask you, the listener, again. Does Moses' initial hesitation, his very human insecurity, make him more relatable to you? Does it make his eventual leadership more compelling? Or does it challenge your expectations of what a divinely appointed leader should be like?
It definitely adds complexity and depth to his character, I think. #C, confrontation and escalation. So Moses, now reluctantly commissioned and armed with divine signs, and with Aaron as his spokesperson, returns to Egypt. And this sets up the confrontation of a lifetime.
The first demand made to Pharaoh. It's simple, direct, but revolutionary.
Incredibly bold. Moses and Aaron go directly before Pharaoh and deliver the message from the God of Israel. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness.
And Pharaoh's reaction, not exactly accommodating.
Not in the slightest. His response drips with arrogance and disdain. Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. It's a flat refusal and a direct challenge to the authority of this unknown God.
And he doesn't just refuse, does he? He actually makes things worse for the Israelites.
Immediately, he accuses Moses and Aaron of interfering with the slaves' work and commands the Egyptian slave drivers and the Israelite foremen. You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw.
But they still have to produce the same number of bricks as before. An impossible task.
Exactly. It's designed to crush their spirits, to show them the futility of challenging him. And it works, initially.
How so?
The slave drivers beat the Israelite foremen when the quotas inevitably aren't met. And the foremen, in their desperation and pain, turn bitterly on Moses and Aaron. They blame them for making their situation worse, for making them stink in Pharaoh's eyes.
It's a heartbreaking moment. Their hope is immediately crushed, turned into resentment.
It really is. And it leads to this incredibly raw, emotional lament from Moses himself. He goes back to God and essentially says, why? Why have you brought trouble on this people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on this people, and you have not rescued your people at all.
He's questioning the whole divine strategy.
A moment of profound doubt and frustration. But God responds forcefully, reaffirming his covenant promises, reminding Moses of his name, Yahweh, and declaring his unwavering plan for redemption. God essentially says, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of his country.
So the stage is set for a major escalation, a battle of wills, a battle of powers.
Exactly. God explicitly states that he will harden Pharaoh's heart. This is a complex theological point, but the narrative suggests it's not arbitrary cruelty, but rather a means to allow God to perform multiple signs and wonders among the Egyptians, demonstrating his power unequivocally, so that ultimately the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord.
And the text even gives us their ages at this point, right? Moses is 80, Aaron 83.
Yes, emphasizing perhaps the long wait, the maturity, the gravity of the mission they are finally undertaking after decades of preparation or obscurity.
So the initial confrontation escalates with that first display of divine power versus Egyptian magic.
The battle of the staffs. Aaron throws down his staff before Pharaoh and his officials, and it becomes a snake.
The Pharaoh calls in his own wise men and sorcerers.
And they, using their secret arts, manage to replicate the feat. Each one throws down his staff, and they also become snakes. For a moment, it seems like an even match, perhaps.
But then comes the decisive moment.
Aaron's staff swallows up their staffs, a clear visual demonstration of superior power.
Yet, despite seeing this,
Pharaoh's heart remains hard. He refuses to listen, just as the Lord had predicted. This initial phase clearly establishes the epic conflict. It's not just Moses versus Pharaoh, it's the God of Israel versus the power and the gods of Egypt. It reviews the immense suffering, the wavering faith of the people, and it raises the stakes incredibly high. It really feels like a cosmic chess game is about to begin.
Okay, so that initial showdown, Aaron's staff swallowing the magician's snakes, it was just the opening salvo. It set the stage for this unfolding catastrophe, the 10 plagues.
And it's crucial to understand these aren't just presented as random unfortunate events. They seem to be a carefully orchestrated, escalating series of judgments.
Each one targeting something specific about Egyptian life, power, or even their religion.
Exactly. Each plague seems to be a direct, systematic challenge to Egyptian stability, their economy, their natural resources, and, significantly, their pantheon of gods.
So let's walk through them. The first plague.
The turning of the Nile River to blood. This is a devastating opening move. The Nile was the absolute lifeblood of Egypt, its source of water, irrigation, fish, transportation.
And religiously significant too, right? They had Nile gods.
Absolutely. Deities like Hapi, the god personifying the Nile's inundation, and Khnum, often seen as the guardian of its source, turning the Nile to blood, killing the fish, making the water putrid and undrinkable. This was a direct assault on Egypt's physical survival and its divine protectors, a cosmic power play.
Did the Egyptian magicians have an answer for this one?
The text says they managed to replicate it with their secret arts, perhaps on a smaller scale with remaining water sources. So Pharaoh, seeing his own magicians could apparently do something similar, remained unimpressed, his heart hardened.
Okay, plague number 2.
Frogs, swarming out of the now toxic Nile, invading everything. Houses, bedrooms, ovens, kneading troughs. Unimaginable infestation.
Another challenge to Egyptian deities.
Yes, this seems aimed at Hecate, the frog-headed goddess associated with fertility, childbirth, and resurrection. Again, the magicians replicated it, somehow bringing up more frogs. But this time, the sheer nuisance, the inescapable presence of the frogs, was too much for Pharaoh.
He actually asked Moses to stop it.
He did. He begged Moses to pray to the Lord to take the frogs away, promising he would let the people go. Moses, interestingly, allowed Pharaoh to set the time for the frogs' removal, demonstrating God's precise control over events.
And the frogs died off.
They did. Piled up in heaps, the land reeked. But as soon as the pressure was off, Pharaoh reneged on his promise. His heart hardened once again.
And the third plague. This one marks a shift, doesn't it?
A very significant shift. Dust turning into gnats, or perhaps lice or mosquitoes, the Hebrew word, is debated. These swarmed over people and animals throughout Egypt.
And the magicians.
Crucially, this time they could not replicate it. They tried but failed. And they went to Pharaoh and confessed, "This is the finger of God." They recognized a power beyond their own abilities, beyond their secret arts.
A direct admission from his own experts. Surely that swayed Pharaoh.
You would think so, but no. Even this confession, this acknowledgement of divine power by his own court magicians wasn't enough. Pharaoh's heart remained hard.
It's fascinating how modern science tries to connect these early plagues, isn't it? The idea of a chain reaction.
Yes, the ecological cascade theory. For instance, a massive algal bloom, a red tide, or perhaps a volcanic ash could turn the Nile toxic and red, killing fish.
Which would naturally drive frogs onto the land.
Exactly. And the mass death of frogs would remove predators for insects, leading to an explosion in the populations of gnats or flies. One event triggering the next in a natural, albeit catastrophic, sequence.
So this progression is key. From the water to the land, from mere annoyance to widespread suffering affecting humans and animals.
And that inability of the magicians to replicate the third plague, it signals a turning point. It suggests a power that truly transcends human or, in their worldview, demonic magic. Divine authority is becoming undeniable.
Which leads to that provocative question for you listening. Do these scientific explanations rooting the miracles in potentially observable phenomena, do they diminish the power of the story for you? Or do they offer a new way to understand it, suggesting maybe the divine works through natural means, just with extraordinary timing and intensity?
The plagues continued their relentless assault, and critically, they started to introduce this clear, almost terrifying distinction between the Egyptians suffering and the Israelites being spared.
Ah, yes, the land of Goshen.
Exactly. The fourth plague involved swarms of flies, perhaps biting flies, causing significant distress and ruining the land, filling Egyptian houses. But crucially, God explicitly told Moses he would set apart the land of Goshen, where the Israelites lived, so that no swarms of flies would be there.
A clear sign of divine favor and protection for Israel.
Undeniable. I will make a distinction between my people and your people, God declared. Pharaoh, under pressure again, made another promise to let them go, offered compromises. But as soon as Moses prayed and the flies departed, Pharaoh's heart hardened yet again.
So the cycle continues. What was the fifth plague?
This one struck at the heart of Egypt's wealth and agricultural economy, their livestock. A terrible pestilence, the text says, struck the Egyptians' animals, horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, goats, causing widespread death.
But again, Goshen was spared.
Completely. The biblical account emphasizes not one animal belonging to the Israelites died. Pharaoh actually sent investigators to confirm this distinction. They reported back that it was true.
And still, he didn't yield.
Still, his heart remained unyielding. Despite the massive economic blow, the loss of wealth, transport, and food sources, incredible stubbornness.
And the sixth plague, it gets more personal, doesn't it?
Much more personal and painful. Boils. Moses and Aaron were commanded to take handfuls of soot from a furnace and toss it into the air in Pharaoh's presence. This resulted in festering boils breaking out on people and animals throughout Egypt.
Soot from a furnace. Maybe symbolic of the kilns where the Israelites made bricks?
That's a possible interpretation, yes. A direct link to their suffering. This wasn't just a minor skin irritation. It sounds like painful, debilitating sores. And significantly, the Egyptian magicians who had tried to stand against Moses earlier were themselves afflicted by the boils and couldn't even stand before him.
Another plague they couldn't replicate or prevent.
Exactly. And here, the text explicitly states, "But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not listen to them, just as the Lord had said to Moses."
That hardening of the heart, sometimes it's Pharaoh, sometimes it's the Lord. It's a central, complex theme.
It really is, raising questions about free will and divine sovereignty. But the narrative effect is clear. The distinction between Israel and Egypt becomes starker. The plagues move from property and comfort to directly attacking life and health, demonstrating escalating divine power and judgment. Imagine the physical agony, the fear, the growing sense of helplessness among the Egyptians, contrasted so sharply with the protected Israelites in Goshen. It paints a powerful picture of divine election and judgment unfolding. The onslaught continued, escalating even further in severity and scope. The seventh plague was truly catastrophic.
The hail.
Yes, but not just any hailstorm. The text describes it as the worst ever to fall in Egypt, accompanied by thunder and fire flashing down, perhaps lightning. It killed every person and animal caught out in the fields and utterly destroyed the crops, like flax and barley that were already mature.
But Goshen was spared again.
Explicitly. Only in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites were, was there no hail. This precision, this targeted devastation, is remarkable.
Did anyone in Egypt heed the warning this time?
Interestingly, yes. The narrative says that some of Pharaoh's own officials, perhaps finally grasping the power they were dealing with, feared the word of the Lord and hurried to bring their slaves and livestock indoors before the storm hit. Others, however, stubbornly ignored Moses' warning and suffered the full consequences.
And Pharaoh's reaction?
Faced with this unprecedented destruction, Pharaoh actually summoned Moses and Aaron and admitted, "This time I have sinned. The Lord is in the right and I and my people are in the wrong." He begged them to pray for the storm to stop and promised, finally, to let the Israelites go. But as soon as Moses prayed and the thunder, hail, and rain stopped, Pharaoh hardened his heart yet again, he and his officials. The reprieve removed the immediate pressure, and his defiance returned.
It's worth noting again, isn't it, that while things like hail and locusts do happen naturally...
Absolutely. There are known natural disasters in the region. But what makes them miraculous in the Exodus account isn't just their occurrence. It's their precise timing, their unparalleled intensity, their highly specific targeting hitting Egypt, sparing Goshen, and their stopping exactly when Moses interceded. It's the orchestration, the undeniable pattern that points beyond mere coincidence for the narrative.
Okay, so after the hail came the eighth plague.
Locusts. After Pharaoh's continued refusal, God told Moses he would bring locusts that would cover the face of the ground so nothing could be seen, and they would devour everything the hail had left behind, every tree, every plant, every blade of grass.
Total agricultural devastation.
Complete ruin. At this point, Pharaoh's own officials had had enough. They urgently pleaded with him, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the people go so that they may worship the Lord their God. Do you not yet realize that Egypt is ruined?"
They saw the writing on the wall. Did Pharaoh listen?
He tried to negotiate, to compromise. He called Moses and Aaron back and offered to let only the men go to worship, keeping the women, children, and livestock as leverage.
Moses refused.
Adamantly. He insisted everyone, young and old, sons and daughters, flocks and herds, must go because it was a festival to the Lord. Pharaoh reacted angrily, but eventually the locusts arrived as warned, consuming everything green. Pharaoh again begged Moses for forgiveness and for the locusts to be removed.
And again, once the plague lifted.
His heart was hardened. The cycle of defiance continued.
Which brings us to the ninth plague, perhaps the most psychologically terrifying.
Arguably, yes. 3 days of total, palpable darkness over the land of Egypt. A darkness so profound, the text says, it could be felt. People couldn't see each other or leave their homes for 3 days.
But again, the distinction.
Crucially, yes. Yet all the Israelites had light in the places where they lived. This plague was a direct, powerful challenge to Ra, the mighty sun god, one of the chief deities in the Egyptian pantheon. Plunging his domain into darkness while sparing the Israelites was a profound theological statement.
How did Pharaoh respond to this one?
Desperate now, he summoned Moses and made another attempt at compromise. "Okay," he said, "go worship the Lord, take your women and children, but leave your livestock behind."
Still trying to keep some control, some leverage.
Exactly. But Moses stood firm. "Not a hoof is to be left behind," he declared, explaining they needed the animals for sacrifices and didn't know exactly what would be required until they arrived. This final refusal enraged Pharaoh.
You banished Moses.
"Yes. Get out of my sight," he roared. "Make sure you don't appear before me again. The day you see my face, you will die." Moses' grim reply was, "You have spoken well. I will not see your face again." The lines were drawn for the final, terrible confrontation.
These later plagues, they really target the very fabric of Egyptian society, their food supply, their economy, their core religious beliefs. That darkness attacking Ra, it's its heavy symbolism.
Absolutely. Pharaoh's increasing desperation, combined with his persistent hardening of heart, whether self-inflicted or divinely ordained in the narrative, builds immense tension. Everything is now pointing towards the final, decisive, and most devastating plague of all. From our perspective, looking back, it really does feel like a carefully orchestrated escalation, doesn't it? Each plague not just punishing, but systematically dismantling Egyptian claims to power and divine favor, setting the stage for the ultimate demonstration. So after Moses' banishment from Pharaoh's presence, the stage was set for the climax, the final, most devastating plague.
God announced it to Moses beforehand, right?
Yes. God told Moses, I will bring one more plague on Pharaoh and on Egypt. After that, he will let you go from here, and when he does, he will drive you out completely.
And the nature of this plague? Chilling.
Yeah, utterly chilling. God declared that at midnight, he would go throughout Egypt, and every firstborn son in the land would die, from the firstborn son of Pharaoh, who sits on the throne, to the firstborn son of the slave girl, who was at her handmill, and all of the firstborn of the cattle as well.
Universal, inescapable judgment across all social strata.
Exactly. God predicted there would be loud wailing throughout Egypt, worse than there has ever been or ever will be again. But crucially, the distinction would be absolute. Among the Israelites, God said, not even a dog will bark at any person or animal. This was designed so that they would know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. Moses, the text says, delivered this final warning to Pharaoh and then left his presence hot with anger.
And central to surviving this final terrifying judgment was the institution of the Passover.
Yes, the Passover ordinance, given to Moses and Aaron just before the plague struck. It became the foundational ritual of remembrance for their liberation.
What were the key instructions?
God designated that month as the first month of their calendar, marking a new beginning. Each Israelite household was to select a year-old male lamb or goat without defect. On the 14th day of the month at twilight, they were to slaughter it.
And the blood was crucial.
Critically important. They were to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they would eat the lamb. This blood served as the sign.
A sign for what?
God declared, the blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. The destroying angel, or God himself, would pass over those marked houses.
And the meal itself.
They were to roast the lamb over the fire and eat it that same night with unleavened bread, matzah, and bitter herbs, maror. And they were to eat it in haste, dressed and ready to leave, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand.
Ready for immediate departure.
Exactly. This entire event, God commanded, was to be commemorated forever as a lasting ordinance. The festival of Passover, Pesach, and the subsequent festival of unleavened bread, a constant reminder of their deliverance.
And then, at midnight, the plague struck.
As foretold. The biblical account states starkly that the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock.
The predicted wailing began.
There was loud wailing throughout Egypt, the text says, for there was not a house without someone dead. This was the blow that finally, irrevocably, broke Pharaoh's will. His resistance crumbled completely.
He summoned Moses and Aaron immediately.
That very night, in the midst of the chaos and grief, Pharaoh called for them. His words were a total surrender. Up, leave my people, you and the Israelites. Go, worship the Lord as you have requested. Take your flocks and herds as you have said, and go. And also, bless me. An astonishing request, asking for a blessing from the very people he had oppressed.
And the Egyptians themselves urged them to leave.
Desperately. Fearing they would all die if the Israelites stayed any longer, the Egyptians urged them to hurry, practically pushing them out of the country. And as Moses had instructed them earlier based on God's command, the Israelites asked their Egyptian neighbors for articles of silver, gold, and clothing.
And the Egyptians gave it to them.
Willingly. The text says God had made the Egyptians favorably disposed toward the people. They gave them whatever they asked, so they plundered the Egyptians, perhaps better translated as receiving parting gifts or reparations.
So they left. Immediately.
They set out at once from Ramesses towards Sukkoth. The text gives a famous number, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children, and also a mixed multitude, other people who joined them.
Carrying their unleavened dough.
Yes, they had no time to wait for yeast to rise, so they baked unleavened cakes from the dough they carried out. The narrative then inserts a note. The length of their stay in Egypt had been 430 years. This night, the night of their departure, was declared a night of vigil to the Lord, to be observed by all Israelites for generations to come.
This is the absolute climax of the plagues. A horrifying, yes, but ultimately decisive act of divine judgment that shattered Pharaoh's resistance.
And the Passover ritual becomes this incredibly powerful foundational practice, forever linking the people to their liberation story, emphasizing that divine protection and distinction. It was the ultimate point of no return, the end of bondage, the beginning of their journey as a free people towards covenant and nationhood.
It leaves you with that profound question, though. What does this final devastating plague reveal about the nature of divine justice as portrayed in this ancient narrative? It's a question that demands deep theological and ethical reflection, considering the cost of freedom and the exercise of divine power.
Okay, so Pharaoh has finally capitulated. The Israelites have left Egypt, laden with parting gifts. They're free. But their journey, their great escape, is really just beginning.
Exactly. Freedom from Pharaoh's immediate grip didn't mean an end to challenges. The path ahead led them directly towards the Red Sea and towards another pivotal, defining moment of divine intervention. #A, the consecration and first steps. As they embarked on this journey, what were some of the first things that happened? I recall something about the firstborn.
Yes, one of the very first divine directives given to Moses as they left was the consecration of the firstborn. Every firstborn male, both human and animal, was declared to belong to the Lord, set apart as holy.
Why was that significant right then?
It served as a powerful, immediate, and perpetual reminder of that final plague back in Egypt, how God had spared Israel's firstborn while striking down Egypt's. It reinforced the cost of their freedom, the concept of redemption, and the unique covenant relationship God was establishing with them. Their lives were spared, so their firstborn were symbolically dedicated back to God.
Makes sense. And then the route they took. It wasn't the most direct way, was it?
No, and the text explicitly tells us why. God deliberately led them away from the shorter coastal route, the way through the Philistine country.
Why avoid that path?
Because, as the text explains, God thought if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. This newly freed people, generations removed from warfare, accustomed only to slavery, were likely not prepared psychologically or militarily for immediate conflict with the formidable Philistines.
So God chose a different path to protect their fragile freedom.
Exactly, a strategic detour. Instead, God led them by the desert road toward the Red Sea, or Reed Sea, Yam Suf. The text adds an interesting detail. They went up out of Egypt, armed for battle or in battle array, suggesting some level of organization despite their vulnerability.
And God's guidance wasn't just abstract, was it? It was visible.
Remarkably visible and tangible. The Lord himself went ahead of them, by day in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light so that they could travel by day or night.
A constant guiding presence.
Yes. This pillar of cloud and fire never left its place in front of the people. It served as an unmistakable sign of divine leadership, guidance, and protection, reassuring them that they were not alone in this daunting, uncertain journey into the wilderness. It's a powerful symbol of God leading his people directly.
So this first leg starts with divine purpose, the consecration, but also divine protection and practical strategic decisions to avoid immediate conflict. It highlights the vulnerability of these newly free people, doesn't it?
It really does. A careful balance of supernatural guidance and prudent, almost paternal care, setting the stage for the trials still to come. #B Pharaoh's pursuit and Israel's fear.
But that sense of security, that divine guidance, it didn't last unchallenged for long, did it? Pharaoh had second thoughts.
Very quickly. God, according to the narrative's theological framing, wasn't finished demonstrating his power over Egypt. He specifically instructed Moses to have the Israelites turn back and encamp in a seemingly vulnerable position, near Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, directly opposite Baal-Zephon, right by the sea.
Why there? It sounds like a trap.
It was intended to look like a trap. God told Moses, Pharaoh will think the Israelites are wandering around the land in confusion, hemmed in by the desert. The goal was explicit. God intended to harden Pharaoh's heart one last time so he would pursue them.
Why? To what end?
So that God could gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, and ultimately, the Egyptians will know that I am the Lord. It was planned as the final, definitive demonstration of divine supremacy.
And Pharaoh took the bait?
Hook, line, and sinker. As soon as the king of Egypt was told the people had actually fled, he and his officials had immediate regrets. What have we done? They lamented. We have let the Israelites go and have lost their services. The economic impact, the loss of their massive slave labor force hit home.
Pride and pragmatism kicked in.
Exactly. Fueled by wounded pride and economic self-interest, Pharaoh mobilized his entire elite military force. The text specifies 600 of his best chariots, along with all the other chariots of Egypt, with officers over all of them, a massive, intimidating army,
And he pursued them relentlessly.
overtaking them just as they were encamped by the sea, precisely where God had intended them to be.
Imagine the Israelites' reaction. Seeing that cloud of dust on the horizon, realizing Pharaoh's army was bearing down on them.
Utter terror. The text says when they looked up and saw the Egyptians marching after them, they were terrified and cried out loudly to the Lord. Their newfound freedom seemed instantly doomed.
And they turned on Moses, didn't they?
Immediately and bitterly.
Yeah.
Their fear turned into accusation. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert.
Wow. A complete reversal. Back to wanting slavery over facing this danger.
It's a really critical moment of human despair. It reflects the deep trauma of generations of slavery, the ingrained fear of Pharaoh's power, and that immediate human tendency to panic, regret, and blame when faced with overwhelming, seemingly inescapable danger. It sets the stage perfectly for the ultimate test of faith and the need for divine intervention.
You can almost feel it, can't you? The dust from thousands of chariots stinging your eyes, the terrifying shouts of the approaching army, the vast, impassable sea at your back, the sheer paralyzing panic of a trapped people. All hope seems utterly lost.
And it's precisely in that moment of absolute terror and despair, with the people panicking and blaming him, that Moses delivers some of the most famous, most reassuring words in the entire Bible.
What did he say?
He tells the terrified Israelites, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still."
Wow. An incredible call for faith and calm in the face of imminent destruction.
A demand for absolute trust in God's power to save them. And then the divine command comes directly to Moses.
What was he told to do?
God essentially asks Moses, "Why are you crying out to me? Tell the Israelites to move on. Raise your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea to divide the water so that the Israelites can go through the sea on dry ground."
Move on towards the sea.
Yes, an act of pure faith. God also reiterates his plan. "I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go in after them, and I will gain glory through Pharaoh and all his army, through his chariots and his horsemen."
Amen.
The final confrontation was imminent.
And then something happened with that pillar of cloud and fire, right?
A brilliant strategic move described in the text. The angel of God and the pillar of cloud, which had been leading the Israelites, moved from in front of them and went behind them.
Standing between the Israelites and the pursuing Egyptians.
Exactly. It came between the army of Egypt and the army of Israel. And the text says throughout the night the cloud brought darkness to the Egyptian side, but light to the Israelite side, so neither army approached the other all night long. It bought them time and created separation.
And then up there, the miracle itself.
The ultimate cinematic miracle, as you called it earlier. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and all that night the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, turning it into dry land. The waters were divided.
Divided how?
The Israelites went through the sea on dry ground with a wall of water on their right and on their left. An absolutely astounding, impossible image, a pathway carved through the deep.
Incredible. But the Egyptians followed.
They did. Hardened by Pharaoh's will and, in the narrative's view, God's design, the entire Egyptian army, chariots, horsemen, infantry, pursued them right into the middle of the sea, down that dry path.
And that's when things turned against them.
Dramatically. During the last watch of the night, the Lord looked down from the pillar of fire and cloud at the Egyptian army and threw it into confusion. The text says he jammed or clogged their chariot wheels, making them difficult to drive.
Panic must have set in among the Egyptians.
They realized they were fighting more than just fleeing slaves. "Let's get away from the Israelites," they shouted. "The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." They recognized the divine intervention, but it was too late.
Because Moses acted again.
At dawn, as commanded by God, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea again, and the waters flowed back to their normal place, returning with full force. The Egyptians were fleeing towards it, and the Lord swept them into the sea.
The entire army.
The text is emphatic. Not one of them survived. The waters covered the chariots, the horsemen, the entire army of Pharaoh that had followed the Israelites into the sea.
While the Israelites watched from the other side.
Yes, They had passed through safely on dry ground. They saw the mighty power the Lord had displayed against the Egyptians, saw their enemies lying dead on the seashore. And the result? The people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant.
This was the ultimate act of salvation, wasn't it? Solidifying the covenant, establishing Moses' authority, defining them as God's chosen, delivered people.
Absolutely. A foundational story of deliverance that became central to their identity and faith for all time. It's a moment of unparalleled divine power and salvation.
It really makes you wonder, if you had stood there on that far shore, having walked on dry land between walls of water, and then watched those same waters crash down and destroy your oppressors, what would you truly believe about the world, about God, about your own destiny? It's a question that cuts right to the core of faith and human experience. Hashtag #B, songs of triumph and early trials in the desert.
The immediate aftermath of that incredible deliverance at the Red Sea. It was pure explosive jubilation.
Understandably. They burst into song, right?
Yes. Exodus 15 preserves what's known as the Song of the Sea, or the Song of Moses. Moses and all the Israelites sang this powerful hymn of praise, celebrating God's incredible triumph. I will sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he is hurled into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation.
It recounts the whole event.
It does, vividly describing God's majestic power, shattering the enemy, guiding his redeemed people. It even anticipates the surrounding nations trembling in fear when they hear of this mighty act.
And Miriam played a role too.
Yes, Moses' sister, Miriam, described here as a prophetess, took a timbrel in her hand, and all the women followed her, with timbrels and dancing. Miriam sang out to them the refrain, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he is hurled into the sea." It was this moment of profound collective exultation, gratitude, and worship.
A peak experience for sure. But that high didn't last very long, did it? The reality of the desert set in quickly.
Almost brutally quickly. After celebrating their freedom, Moses led them from the Red Sea into the desert of Shur. And for 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding any water.
3 days in the desert without water. That's serious.
Extremely serious. When they finally came to a place called Mara, they found water, but it was bitter, undrinkable. The name Mara itself means bitter.
And the people's reaction? Not singing anymore, I bet.
No, the jubilation vanished instantly. They grumbled against Moses, complaining, "What are we to drink?" It's this immediate dramatic shift from exultation to complaint. Very human, perhaps, but also highlighting the challenges ahead.
The euphoria of freedom replaced by the desperate, immediate need for survival.
Exactly. Moses, as he would do time and time again, cried out to the Lord in response to the people's grumbling. And the Lord showed him a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the bitter water, and miraculously, the water became sweet, fit to drink.
Another divine provision in response to their need and complaint.
Yes. And the text notes that it was there at Mara that the Lord issued a decree and a law for them and tested them, promising that if they listened carefully and obeyed, he would not bring on them any of the diseases he brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. It established a pattern, divine provision linked to obedience and trust.
And shortly after Mara, they found a better spot.
Yes, they came to Elim, a much more pleasant oasis, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, a place of temporary respite and refreshment where they camped by the water.
This rapid emotional swing, though, from the absolute high of the Red Sea victory to the despair and grumbling at Mara just days later, it really reveals the human heart of this epic story, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It shows us a people who, despite witnessing the most incredible miracles imaginable, still struggled profoundly with fear, trust, and patience when faced with immediate hardship. It sets a pattern of divine provision constantly meeting human struggle and complaint that will define the next 40 years of their journey in the wilderness, highlighting the fragility of faith, even right after undeniable wonders.
So we followed the dramatic arc of the biblical narrative slavery, the plagues, the escape, the Red Sea crossing, the first steps into the wilderness. An incredible story.
Rich with awe-inspiring events and profound human drama.
But as we discussed earlier, this narrative, especially the miraculous parts, faces significant questions when viewed through the lens of modern history and science. The silence of the records, the lack of archaeological evidence.
Exactly. Which leads us to this final part of our deep dive, exploring how scholars, scientists, and theologians have tried to go beyond a purely literal reading to explain the unexplainable, or perhaps to understand the story's truth in different ways, bridging that gap between faith and reason, or finding meaning beyond historical fact. Hashtag A, scientific theories for the miracles.
Let's start with the scientific or naturalistic explanations that have been proposed for some of these biblical wonders. The parting of the Red Sea, for instance. How might science approach that?
Well, one prominent theory, as we touched on, questions the translation of Yam Suf. It might not mean the deep Red Sea we know today, but rather the Reed Sea, potentially a shallower, marshy area, maybe one of the lakes north of the Gulf of Suez, like Lake Timsah or the Bitter Lakes.
And how would that help explain the parting?
In a shallower body of water, a phenomenon called wind set-down is possible. A very strong, sustained wind, like the strong east wind the Bible mentions blowing all night, could theoretically push the water back from one shore towards the other, exposing the lake bed or creating a temporary land bridge.
So the wind literally pushes the water aside.
Essentially, yes, over a large enough shallow area. When the wind eventually died down or shifted direction, the water would rush back in, potentially inundating anyone caught in the exposed area. This aligns with known meteorological and hydrological phenomena.
But the timing would still be crucial.
Absolutely. From a purely scientific view, it would be an extraordinary coincidence of wind strength, duration, direction, and the Israelites' arrival and passage. From a faith perspective, of course, that perfect timing itself would be seen as divinely orchestrated, even if natural forces were the mechanism.
Okay, what about the 10 plagues? We mentioned the ecological cascade idea earlier.
Right. Many scientific hypotheses try to link the plagues in a natural sequence, possibly triggered by a single major environmental event. A popular candidate is a massive volcanic eruption, like the eruption of Pharaoh, modern Santorini, in the Aegean Sea, which occurred sometime in the late Bronze Age, roughly overlapping with some proposed dates for the Exodus.
How could a volcanic eruption cause the plagues?
Well, the ash fall could have contaminated the Nile, turning it red with minerals, like iron oxides, or triggering a toxic algal bloom, a red tide, explaining the first plague.
Killing fish, making water undrinkable.
Which would then force frogs onto land, plague 2. The mass death of frogs removes predators, leading to an explosion of insects like gnats and flies, plagues 3 and 4.
And the diseases?
The insects could spread diseases affecting livestock, plague 5, and causing boils or skin infections in humans, plague 6. Severe storms with hail, plague 7, can be associated with dramatic climate shifts following large eruptions. Locust swarms, plague 8, are natural, though devastating events in the region, perhaps exacerbated by ecological disruption. Even the thick darkness, plague 9, could be attributed to dense volcanic ash clouds blocking the sun for days.
That's quite a chain reaction. What about the final plague, the death of the firstborn? That seems harder to explain naturally.
It's definitely the most challenging. Some theories speculate about a specific epidemic that disproportionately affected children, or perhaps food poisoning related to stored grain. For instance, if grain stores became contaminated with mold or toxins, the firstborn, who often had privileged access or received the first portion, might have been disproportionately affected. Others have suggested localized releases of toxic gases like carbon dioxide, settling near ground level where people slept. These are highly speculative, of course.
And even the manna in the desert has natural explanations proposed.
Yes. Some researchers suggest it could be the sweet, sticky excretions of scale insects that feed on tamarisk trees in the Sinai. This substance, known as honeydew, crystallizes into small white flakes or globules when it falls in the ground, matching some aspects of the biblical description. Others suggest resins from certain acacia trees.
So these theories attempt to ground the biblical evidence in observable natural phenomena.
They try to bridge that gap, suggesting the biblical authors might have interpreted extraordinary, perhaps divinely timed natural events through a religious lens, seeing God's hand directly at work in them.
It raises that interesting question again, doesn't it? Do these scientific possibilities challenge the story's power for you, the listener, or do they enhance it by showing how the divine might work through the natural world, rather than always suspending its laws? Can faith and science find common ground here? Hashtag B theological and mystical interpretations.
But of course, scientific explanations aren't the only way or even the primary way for many people to understand the Exodus. There's a long and powerful tradition of interpreting it symbolically.
Seeing its truth not in literal history, but in its deeper spiritual or philosophical meaning.
Precisely. From this perspective, the Exodus becomes a timeless, universal spiritual journey, relevant whether every detail happened exactly as written or not.
So Egypt isn't just a place on a map.
In this reading, Egypt becomes a powerful metaphor. It represents any state of bondage, Slavery to sin, to ego, to materialism, to limiting beliefs, to oppressive systems, to old ways of being that hold us back spiritually or psychologically. It's the narrow place, the constricted state we need to escape.
And the Red Sea crossing.
That becomes the symbol of the necessary leap of faith, the radical break required to move from that old life of servitude into a new reality of freedom and potential. It's crossing a seemingly insurmountable barrier, an act of courage, surrender, and transformation.
And the wilderness, not just a geographical location.
No, the wilderness transforms into the essential, though often difficult place of testing, purification, and spiritual growth. It's where old habits and identities are shed, where one learns dependence on divine providence rather than self-sufficiency, where character is forged through trial, and where one confronts their own inner struggles.
Leading ultimately to Sinai.
Mount Sinai represents the encounter with the divine in its fullness, the reception of wisdom, law, purpose, and meaning. It's where the covenant is established, providing a framework for living a liberated, ethical, and spiritually grounded life.
This symbolic reading has deep roots, doesn't it?
Very deep. In Jewish mystical traditions like Kabbalah, the Exodus is viewed as a core archetype of the soul's liberation from the constraints of the material world, a universal journey toward inner freedom that every individual soul undertakes in some way.
So this perspective really elevates the story beyond just a historical document.
It transforms it into a timeless, universal allegory, applicable to individual spiritual growth, to psychological healing, even to collective societal transformation and the ongoing struggle for justice and liberation in any era. The mystery of its historicity, from this viewpoint, isn't a problem to be solved, but perhaps part of its enduring power. It invites continuous personal engagement, reflection, and application to our own lives.
So if we consider the Exodus primarily as this rich spiritual code, what universal truths does it reveal about freedom, about struggle, about faith, about the journey from constriction to liberation that still resonate powerfully with you today in your own context? It shifts the focus from, did it happen exactly like this, to what does it mean for us now? #, see Exodus as a cultural archetype and identity formation.
And regardless of how we approach the historicity debate, literal event, divinely timed natural phenomena, profound allegory, or some mix of all three, what remains absolutely undeniable is the staggering cultural impact and enduring power of the Exodus narrative itself.
It's woven itself into the very fabric of Western civilization and beyond, hasn't it?
Incredibly so. As we mentioned, the Exodus story became nothing less than the blueprint for freedom movements across history and across cultures.
You see it in the rhetoric of escaped slaves in the U.S.
Absolutely. The spirituals sung by enslaved African Americans are full of Exodus imagery. Go down Moses references to Pharaoh crossing the Jordan. They saw their own struggle for freedom directly mirrored in the Israelites' story. Harriet Tubman was even called Moses.
And later in the Civil Rights Movement.
Dr. King's speeches are saturated with Exodus themes, leading his people out of the Egypt of segregation towards the promised land of equality. It provided a powerful, divinely sanctioned narrative for challenging oppression.
And beyond the U.S.
You see it in Latin American liberation theology, in African liberation struggles against colonialism, in anti-apartheid movements in South Africa. The story provides this universally resonant framework for people yearning to break free from oppression.
The symbolism is just so potent, isn't it? Pharaoh as the ultimate tyrant.
The embodiment of oppressive power, yes. The Red Sea as that seemingly impossible barrier to freedom that must be overcome through faith and courage.
And Moses.
Moses becomes the archetype of the reluctant but faithful leader who dares to challenge empires, confront injustice, and guide people towards a better future, often against overwhelming odds and even amidst the complaints of those he leads.
And its religious impact is obviously immense.
Foundational for three major world religions. For Judaism, it's the central event, commemorated annually at Passover, defining their identity as a people chosen and liberated by God.
For Christians,
it's seen as a crucial foreshadowing, a type of spiritual salvation and liberation from sin through Christ. Jesus is often portrayed as a new Moses, leading people to a new covenant.
And in Islam,
Moses, or Musa, is revered as one of the most important prophets. The Quran recounts his story extensively, emphasizing his steadfastness, his confrontation with Pharaoh, and his role in receiving divine revelation. It's a shared heritage.
And this story isn't just confined to religious contexts, is it? It permeates culture.
Massively. Think of the epic Hollywood films. Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments is practically embedded in our collective cultural memory. That image of Charlton Heston parting the sea. Animated films like The Prince of Egypt. countless references in literature, art, music, even political speeches today.
So the analysis seems clear. Whether you read it as literal history or powerful myth, the impact of the Exodus story is undeniable. It's provided this shared language, this common framework for understanding liberation, justice, divine intervention, and the struggle against tyranny for millennia.
It truly has. Its enduring power seems to lie not just in what it might have been historically, but in what it has become, what it has meant, and continues to mean for billions of people across cultures and centuries. It speaks to something fundamental in the human spirit.
A testament to the power of narrative itself, perhaps. The power of a story to shape identity, inspire action, and offer hope against all odds. #tag outro.
So we've taken quite a journey today, haven't we? From the banks of the Nile and the cry of oppressed slaves,
Through the escalating drama of the 10 plagues, the defiance of Moses before Pharaoh.
to that breathtaking, defining moment at the Red Sea and the first uncertain steps into the vast wilderness.
We've grappled with the text itself, its layers and complexities, thanks to things like the documentary hypothesis.
And we've confronted those challenging silences, the lack of clear corroboration in Egyptian records, the archaeological void in the Sinai.
We've explored the scientific attempts to explain the miracles, seeing if natural phenomena could play a role.
And delved into the rich theological and mystical interpretations that find profound, timeless meaning in the Exodus as a universal allegory of liberation.
What really stands out, I think, after weaving through all these threads, is the sheer resilience and adaptability of this narrative.
It truly is remarkable. Whether the Exodus happened exactly as described in every detail, or whether it's a masterful composite story, perhaps forged in the fires of exile, to give hope and identity to a displaced people, its power is just undeniable.
The core image, a people escaping slavery, guided by faith, receiving laws that still underpin so much of our modern morality and legal thought, that resonates so deeply.
It's a story of immense transformative power, and maybe, just maybe, the very mystery surrounding its precise historical details is part of what keeps it so alive, so debated, so fiercely relevant thousands of years later.
It forces us to keep engaging with it, doesn't it? To keep asking questions, seeking answers, finding our own meaning within it.
Exactly. The ambiguity invites interpretation, ensures it remains a living story, not just a closed historical file.
So as we conclude this deep dive, we want to leave you, our listener, with a final question to ponder, a provocative thought, perhaps.
If tomorrow some definitive evidence emerged, scientific proof, an undeniable archaeological discovery that either conclusively proved or definitively disproved the historical accuracy of the Exodus account as written,
Would that fundamentally change your understanding of its truth, its meaning, its profound influence on human civilization? How do you ultimately navigate that complex interplay between faith, history, scientific inquiry, and that deep, abiding human need for powerful stories of liberation? Something to think about.